Hi, I'm Jess, part-time Hobbit, and I'm here to talk to you about who Tolkien was. He was the guy who wrote The Lord of the Rings. As you can see, I'm a bit of a Tolkien scholar myself.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Anyone who's read his works likely has their own idea of just who J.R.R. Tolkien was. There's no way not to. Whether it's the amusing interjections that he adds in throughout The Hobbit, the meandering journeys that he leads you on in The Lord of the Rings, or the vast halls and magnificent myths that he guides you through in the Silmarillion, it's impossible not to begin to think of Tolkien as a character in his own right. And in my case, I had to know more about who this character was. For me, my journey began with a simple Google search, and of course there's a wealth of information that pops up. There are hundreds of pretty aesthetic quotes attributed to Tolkien that you can find on Pinterest or Tumblr, along with quirky stories of his time as an Oxford professor. However, and I hate to have to be the one to tell you this, but not everything you see on the internet is entirely factual. One of my favorite examples of this was an article published online to coincide with the release of the second Hobbit movie, titled 10 Tolkien Quotes to Live By. This sounds like a nice enough list until you look into it a little further and realize that 7 out of those 10 aren't even actual Tolkien quotes. It's a healthy mixture of quotes taken severely out of context, quotes with missing words, and lines written by entirely different authors. This is just one example of how the picture of Tolkien that the internet presents is only a very small part of the whole picture. After realizing that the internet has betrayed you, you might turn to good old-fashioned books and find the 1997 book titled J.R.R. Tolkien, A Biography. This definitely presents a good starting point. The biography was written by Humphrey Carpenter, an Oxford native, renowned for his bibliographies on the lives of famous authors, particularly Tolkien and his contemporaries. The biography is the only work about Tolkien's life that was officially licensed by the Tolkien estate and Tolkien family, which certainly lends it some credence. Carpenter met Tolkien on multiple occasions, and he's the only set of eyes that has ever seen the full collection of Tolkien's letters. With the help of Tolkien's son, Christopher, Carpenter compiled and edited the only published compilation of those letters. The biography weaves a very compelling story, but I'll save the exact details of Tolkien's life for another video. Carpenter tells the story of Tolkien's troubled and tumultuous youth, but allows some spark of the future academic and philologist to shine through. You can see the beginnings of many of Tolkien's future myths and legends, but Carpenter does allow those events to just speak for themselves. Carpenter's biography presents Tolkien exactly as one might imagine him, a doting father, husband, and professor, with his eye cast always towards the past, shunning matters of the modern world. It is such a clean-cut portrait that it almost begins to appear as a caricature. While this is a pleasant enough idea, I find there's some kind of dissonance within it. I seriously doubt that the archetypical stodgy Oxford professor could write something as startling and haunting as the tale of Turin Turambar, with its incestuous siblings and violent suicides. To me, the overly conservative curmudgeon doesn't fit in with the kind of man who could write the sort of passionate bond that Frodo and Sam have as they carry each other up Mount Doom. Carpenter's biographies seem to be lacking something essential. Upon finding this book, by Holly Ordway, titled Tolkien's Modern Reading, I felt vindicated in these beliefs. Published almost 40 years after Carpenter's biography, it examines quite a few discrepancies in that presentation of Tolkien's character. Hi, Editing Jess here. I just want to point out that I talk a lot in this section about Ordway addressing Carpenter, and there is a lot in Tolkien's Modern Reading that doesn't address Carpenter at all, and I did not want to make it seem like her book is entirely focused on refuting Carpenter's biography. It's just this was the particularly pertinent point for this video. Check out the book if you're interested. It has a lot of very interesting information on Tolkien's reading habits and his inspirations, etc., etc. Just to clarify, she begins by pointing out some flaws that Carpenter himself later admitted. He states in writing that he had begun with a preconceived notion of who and what Tolkien was. Carpenter had grown up surrounded by stuffy and weird Oxford men, and that was his vision of Tolkien when he began the writing process. Carpenter realized over time that this wasn't the full picture, but admits that he was never able to fully reconcile his initial version of Tolkien with who he later came to know. Ordway believes that these misrepresentations were a large part of why Carpenter's initial draft was deemed unacceptable by the Tolkien family. However, the piece needed to be ready in 2 weeks for publishers, so Carpenter was left to hack away all of the pieces that were deemed unacceptable. Ordway believes that this mad scramble only made the discordance within the book worse. Ordway also takes note of Carpenter's well-recorded anti-establishment leanings. She believes that this predisposed him to paint Tolkien with a far more conservative brush than he deserves. She believes it wrong for Carpenter to represent Tolkien as someone who worked and lived primarily in the past. While Tolkien was definitely a medievalist, Ordway argues that there's overwhelming evidence that he certainly didn't cloister himself away from the modern world. She brings up numerous examples of Tolkien citing modern works as both inspiration and casual reading, disregarding Tolkien's willingness to explore and embrace modern thought severely undercuts many aspects of his creative mind. Ordway also urges readers to remember that Carpenter was the editor of Tolkien's letters. He was the one who cut and trimmed the pieces together, and in many ways, the way that we perceive Tolkien now, for better or for worse, was guided by Carpenter's hands and his personal bias. So does this mean that we should just throw out the entire bibliography? Of course not. Just as Carpenter's biography reveals some cracks upon closer inspection, Tolkien's modern reading isn't necessarily a flawless approach either. Ordway's aggressive and almost slanderous stance is backed by plenty of facts, but I do think it's important to notice that some of these facts are missing their full context. For example, when it comes to Ordway's notes about how Tolkien's letters were edited, she speaks as though this were an intentional reworking of his original thoughts and that the letters should never have been touched. However, looking at things objectively, we have to acknowledge that of course the letters were edited, and probably for a good reason. Tolkien was never a particularly concise author at the best of times, and publishing a textbook of every single thing he wrote simply wasn't practical. Not to mention the fact that publishers wanted Carpenter to focus on the elements of Tolkien's letters that further explained elements of his stories, meaning that some of Tolkien's nuance and personality had to be lost along the way. Nuance was definitely lost, but that doesn't necessarily indicate nefarious intent. So just as we discussed Carpenter's underlying biases, we also have to look at Ordway's potential leanings. It seems that Ordway's angle is to refute Carpenter's overly conservative portrayal of Tolkien. She tries to portray Tolkien as more relatable and with the times.
I'm with it. I'm hip.
This could be due in part to the fact that she was writing for a Catholic publisher from a Christian perspective. Tolkien was an incredibly famous and prolific author, and also a Catholic. Surely, Ordway would see an advantage to revitalizing the way that Tolkien is perceived and refuting works that make him out as stuffy and rigid. However, in her desire to prove her point, or rather disprove Carpenter's, she seems to fall into the trap of putting her own slant onto Tolkien's story just as much as Carpenter does, but in the opposite direction. She may not turn Tolkien into a caricature, but she may be trying a little too hard to make him into a saint. So what am I really saying here? That books are useless and we should simply return to our Google searches? Of course not. As long as you can keep in mind that these books were both written by people who will inevitably bestow their own biases on the things they write, these can be very useful resources. They're both incredibly compelling and well-researched and help you see and appreciate different facets of Tolkien's work. You can learn some of the story even if it's not the full picture. So now that we've determined that Tolkien wasn't a caricature or a saint, let's look to another presentation of Tolkien and his life, the 2019 movie simply titled Tolkien. I watched this movie when it first came out, and considering how non-critical I am of movies in general, I remember liking it in a kind of like, well, that was a movie that didn't do anything to offend me kinda way. But when I rewatched it for this video, I was left feeling very frustrated. The film has a highly successful director and a star-studded cast, and I think you can see that there was a lot of excitement and passion that went into its creation. However, it felt to me as if this haze of adoration for Middle-earth and its creator managed to wash any real grit right out of the story. Perhaps due to rose-colored glasses or the fear of upsetting anyone with preconceived notions on Tolkien, the movie made him both a caricature and a saint, and scrubbed out any part of him that may have been able to make a real point. For one thing, in a half-hearted attempt to make the film more accessible, major details are left out of Tolkien's life, such as his Catholic faith. There's also an infuriating tendency throughout the film to try and directly connect events of Tolkien's life with specific moments in Tolkien's legendarium. This comes across as a bit overdone in some scenes, and downright tone-deaf in others, such as inserting CGI dragons and great value Nazgul into one of history's most bloody conflicts. By the time the credits rolled, I was left feeling that I had learned little more about Tolkien than that stupid little joke I made at the beginning of this video, where it pointed out that Tolkien was the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings. I sat there and wondered why, after hours of research and contemplation, I felt that I had had a better idea of who Tolkien was before I ever found the Carpenter biography. So I went back to that biography, but I finally read that bit that I had zealously skipped on my first run through, the introduction. In the introduction, Carpenter expresses Tolkien's distaste for a biography of any sort. One of my strongest opinions Tolkien once wrote is that the investigation of an author's biography is an entirely vain and false approach to his works. Which pretty much summed up my problem. Because here I am, scrounging and fact-checking for knowledge about a man who really didn't think that knowing the details of an author's life did a whole lot for the reader. Of course, I would never discourage anyone from looking further into Tolkien's life, but I think I found that the best place to get to know him isn't through that kind of research. You won't discover who Tolkien truly was in pages written by a man who met him twice, or in a book written by a scholar trying to make a point, or by tracing every event in Middle-earth to a historical moment in Tolkien's life. You find him right where he always was, in his witty interjections in The Hobbit that make you feel like you're sitting at his feet by the fire, up a few minutes past your bedtime, in meandering journeys through ancient woods alight with spirit and song, in the voice of epics and myths torn out of the pages of history and shaped with a deft and adoring hand into something entirely new. If you're looking for Tolkien in academic debate, you've missed the mark. Go back to where it began and let Tolkien introduce himself the way he wanted to be introduced. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. I hope you guys enjoyed that video as much as I enjoyed making it. I would love to hear what your personal experiences have been with Tolkien, how you got to know these stories, and how you got to know him. We have a really fun video coming up next week, so make sure that you subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it, so that you can come back next week to hang out with me. I'm really grateful that you were able to join me this week, and I hope that you all have a very happy, hobbity day.